Hello, welcome back to Aetheral Space 11.38, War for the Worlds, Part 3. We are back.
Hey, Aetherheads. I am so excited. Let's just jump right into it, right?
Okay, man.
The intro. Hey. Don't say that to me.
What, is it okay, man?
Hey. I just said don't say that.
Are you okay?
I need to read the story. Man. As the green star descended upon the Supreme, he raised his massive hand and spoke. This time, he didn't smile. Excel Search, Black Saturn! That was stupid, Esmeralda, rushing in like that. But that's what happens when you convince yourself of bullshit. You get all pissed off when someone calls you out on it. Believe me. I know, man. I get it. So it's up to me to teach you a lesson. Black Saturn was an ability that the Supreme didn't like to bring out much. It had been the ability of his mentor, a man he didn't care to give too much thought to. He had to admit, though, it was a damn good ability. Esmeralda, right on the verge of attacking, seemed to realize his mistake, and tried to change course, blasting himself backwards. Too late. Momentum and fate had already betrayed him. The obsidian sphere of Black Saturn, like a three-dimensional shadow, had already appeared in his inevitable path. Black Saturn was a simple ability, even once it was enhanced by Aetheral Surge. It appeared, targeted the area directly in front of itself, pulled in space, and obliterated it. Oh my god. There's literally a meme ability about that in the roleplay, but like on a such... So a guy has an ability he claims does that, but like it's just a tiny little hole that like zaps like paper and shit. It's like really weak. Hope you like it, Esmeralda. It's a gift from me to you. As Black Saturn activated, dragging in dirt, stone, and man, there was no sound, no bang, no boom, no scream. As far as the Supreme knew, not even sound could escape Yoden's ability. Oh my god, it's Cream from JoJo. The whole world had no choice.
As for the stuff where it goes, even I don't know where it ends up.
It ends up on Saturn, that's what the name says. The whole world had no choice but to put a finger to its lips. This better not kill you, the Supreme grimly thought as Black Saturn drew breath. Don't you dare die! And for a moment, as light was dragged forth, everything went dark. He'd been stupid. Skipper had understood that the moment he'd launched off. He'd told himself 1,000 times in this fight that getting close to the Supreme without a plan would be a fatal mistake. He'd lost his backup, he'd lost his distractions, and as if that wasn't enough, he jumped into the lion's jaws by his own volition. And why? Because of a few careless words from the man he was here to kill. What a joke. Standing before him, standing before the Supreme, Skipper felt just as he did back then. A stupid kid, hoping that Shining Giant was something more. Hoping that the ideals he'd been told so much about were more than just fantasies. Endlessly, endlessly disappointed. Well, he'd learned his lesson. He'd managed to blast himself away and avoid being killed by that attack, but he'd learned his lesson. The teaching had been forced upon him. After all, his left leg had been vaporized from the knee down. The funny thing was that it didn't even hurt. The stump was burning hot, but that was more because of the blood spilling out than anything else. There wasn't even a phantom pain. It was like the world had just forgotten he'd ever had a leg in the first place. The erasure was that total. Skipper flew up into the sky, emerald wings propelling him, infusing his injury with aether to slow the bleeding. And still he knew that wouldn't be enough. The Supreme had said, after all, hadn't he? That he was pissed off? The leisurely, carefree battle the Supreme had marched into had now come to an end. Now he would be here for real. Skipper had seen Sloth, and now it was time for wrath. Even as a dot down on the ground far, far below, Skipper could see those lips moving. He could see those fatal words being formed. Excel Surge, Sevenfold Serpent, Tsunami! The earth shook as 7 massive serpents, each the size of a skyscraper, exploded out of the Supreme's elbow, lashing up into the sky as they pursued Skipper. Each was composed entirely of water, with teeth and quills of ice, providing only the most basic illusion of structure. Even without those icicle teeth, though, just being slammed into by water infused to that degree would surely be fatal. Skipper pointed his wings at the first 2 of the incoming heads. Heartbeat Shotgun! An ordinary Heartbeat Shotgun wouldn't be enough to deal with familiars like this, but luckily Heartbeat Freedom was giving Skipper the edge he needed. As the heads of the 2 serpents popped like bubbles, Skipper launched himself down into the mist of the broiling necks. The 2 he destroyed would no doubt regenerate, so his best course of action would be to force the Supreme to switch to another ability. Avoiding the snaps and massive bites of the remaining serpents, Skipper reached a point where their aquatic nets converged, and found the wreckage of an executioner there instead, posed like a mannequin, arm raised up in the air. Skipper's heart sank. This was the trick he just used against the Supreme a few minutes ago, attaching his ability to an automatic so he could use it as a decoy. Was that how much the Supreme's comments had rattled him? Enough that he could be fooled so easily? Mistakes after mistakes, and none of them he could afford. Skipper knew the attack would come before it even happened, but it was far too late to do anything about it. With a mighty splash, the Supreme burst out of the body of one of the serpents where he'd been waiting. Concealed, and slammed into Skipper, seizing him in a vicious hold and pulling him close. Waiting, for reference, means like moving through water, like he's walking through it. They were face to face, only inches apart, and Skipper could feel the Supreme's volcanic breath. His face was stretched into a grin without mirth, rage boiling in his eyes, and Skipper was sure the Supreme could see exactly the same. Sorry, I needed water.
No problem. There's the sevenfold serpents of it. Just take a sip.
The Supreme snarled. You're just like me. You're here for the thrill of it. There's nothing else. Fuck you, Skipper hissed. We're nothing alike. As the two of them fell through the sky, locked in each other's grips, the Supreme laughed. Oh yeah? He demanded, thrusting his palm towards Skipper's face. Heartbeat shotgun! Skipper finished. The attack struck at the Supreme's face, but Skipper had chosen his angle well. The shotgun blasted right past the stump of Skipper's leg as it was fired, sending the blood gushing from it right into the Supreme's eyes and blinding him. The Supreme's chant was cut off, and the fist he swung instead went wide, barely missing Skipper's face. This wasn't over. He still had a chance. So long as he was alive, he still had a chance. Still held tight in the Supreme's grip, Skipper lunged forward as his enemy opened his mouth to speak, and rammed his mechanical hand into that mouth. Steel claws forced their way down the Supreme's throat, even as he choked on them, even as the blood evaporated from his eyes, revealing his furious gaze. The moment those eyes could see again, Skipper offered them a cocky grin. Heartbeat shotgun! Heartbeat shotgun! Heartbeat shotgun! Heartbeat shotgun! It didn't matter how strong you were. If someone set off a missile inside your throat, you were going to damn well feel it. The Supreme wheezed as the blasts fired directly into his body, one after another. Bang! 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 Blood oozing up out of his throat and coating Skipper's fingers. The Supreme's hand lashed out, seizing Skipper's forearm and slowly pulling it out of his mouth. To hell with that, he could do this, he could! Skipper screamed in exertion as he poured his aether into the prosthetic, overpowering the Supreme for a single moment as he forced his hand in further. The Supreme wasn't using that Earth Sculpt ability right now. He was still controlling the serpents, but their size made them unable to strike at them so far below. If he could silence the Supreme again, it would be permanent. He still had a chance! Ugh! The Supreme choked out incoherently. Ugh! Skipper's eyes widened. Those weren't just noises. The massive club appeared in the Supreme's free hand in a flash of golden aether, and without hesitation he slammed it into Skipper's midsection, sending him flying off. The hand of Skipper's prosthetic snapped off in the process, and the Supreme spat it out, along with copious amounts of blood, as he watched Skipper's body crash through the water wall of one of the collapsing serpents and vanish from sight. As the Supreme had switched ability, the serpents were losing their form, but the water they were made from wasn't going anywhere. Unsteady on his feet for the first time in decades, the Supreme spread his arms wide and let a brand new ocean smash over him. 6 years ago. I need water again, hang on.
No problem.
Oh, this water's dusty, it's old. Ugh, bad water.
Expired water?
You ever just leave water out for a couple days and you drink it and it's like, that's not good water, bro. 6 years ago, the throne room was in ruins. Strings stretched from corner to corner like massive, multicolored spiderwebs. Miniature tornadoes spun wildly around the borders of the conflict, tearing apart anything they came in contact with. The only thing truly intact was the throne itself, and, of course, the man sitting in it. Avamen panted for breath, glaring at the man who'd forced his way onto the Shisha. The shattered remains of his mask lay at his feet. Some distant instinct told him to cover his face to hide his shame, but he ignored it. With death lingering in the air like this, dividing his attention would be fatal. His opponent didn't look much better. The man who'd called himself Wu Ming was covered in cuts and gashes, and those he'd stitched shut were slowly dribbling blood. Even with his horrific injuries, though, that sly grin on his face went unchanged. Irritating, truly irritating. Someone would die soon, that much was certain. They had reached the climax of this confrontation. Avamen took a step forward, and the unthinkable happened. "Stop," said God. His voice, unused for years, was soft. So soft it was tempting for Avamen to think he imagined it. It could have been overpowered by the slightest breeze, and yet it commanded the world. Avaman looked up at his master. My Supreme? He whispered, uncomprehending. Surely he had misunderstood. Surely he had misheard. This man is an intruder and assassin, unworthy of your... Oh, sorry. This man is an intruder and an assassin, unworthy of your time and attention. Surely you don't mean to... God's gaze slid over to Avaman, and in those dull blue pupils he saw the slightest glimmer of disdain. Avaman could have killed himself there and then. He's... interesting. God needed no more reason than that, and Avaman instantly dropped into a bow of supplication. Wu Ming across from him just scratched at the back of his head, laughing, with that idiotic and arrogant grin on his face. God had just personally shown him mercy, and he was acting like he was entitled to it. Disgusting! Disreputable! Even as he bowed, Avaman glared at his new colleague. Somehow, someday, he'd tear that grin away. Wu Ming grinned. He stood up in the air atop that floating ball of yarn, with further lengths of string dangling from the tips of his fingers. Rainbow aether crackled around him as he waggled his eyebrows, looking directly at Avaman. Even now, the mockery! Avaman sneered up at his adversary, keeping tight hold of his two prisoners, Del said in his hand and Blaine under his foot. I always knew you were scum, he declared. How long have you been on their side, Wu Ming? Since the beginning? Yes, that would make sense. He'd infiltrated the contenders for the purpose of this battle now, betraying the supremacy at the perfect moment to throw their forces into chaos. If nothing else, he'd chosen his moment well. For a moment, there was no reply. Avaman frowned. That is it, right? As if considering the question for the very first time, Wu Ming put a finger to his chin. Well, he dragged out the word, eyes cast up to the sky. I guess I betrayed you guys around 7 minutes ago? That was when I got bored of being on the winning side. Anger spiked through Avaman's brain, and his grip on Delsed's voice tightened. You betrayed the supremacy, he hissed, on a whim. Well, I became a contender on a whim, Wu Ming grinned cheekily. So yeah, I guess. Avaman blinked. I see. I'm not reading all that. Go ahead, why don't you read this next part, Dan?
You get the gist. Go ahead. The entire page is whirlwind crossbow.
Whirlwind crossbow, whirlwind crossbow, whirlwind crossbow, whirlwind crossbow!
Anger reached 100%.
Tan can
it's like in Persona when it's like, try and take my treasure if you like, and it goes like to 99% on the anger.
Yeah. Alright. Avaman fired attacks from every inch of his body, each of them spearing into the sky as they pursued Ming with a vengeance. He lost hold of Delset in the process, of course, and Blaine shot out from under his boot, but that was fine. They were no longer relevant. The only thing that mattered was these 100 shots hit their single target. Right now, every last bit of Avaman's was being... Every last bit of Avaman's being was focused on killing this clown. In the moment before his streaking stars could strike Ming, however, something absurd occurred. Of course it did! The strings that surrounded Wu Ming's body converged upon him, wrapping him up in a kaleidoscopic cocoon in the instant before the crossbow struck. As the attacks buffeted him against the cocoon... as the attacks buffeted against the cocoon. I would get rid of the him after struck, by the way. Avaman heard muffled words from within it, some inane ability name, most likely. And then a moment later, it exploded outwards again. Wu Ming had changed appearance. Pink butterfly wings fluttered from his back, twinkling scales drifting down from them, and a pair of tiny black eyes blinked beneath his ordinary one. Is he Star Butterfly? On a whim, he had utterly changed his biology, turning into a scurrant. Then again, he'd said, hadn't he? He lived his life based on whims. He'd die from one, too. Ming waggled his eyebrows as Avaman glared up at him. DNA strings, right? Strands, but close enough.
Ming doesn't know that.
Avaman did not reply. He would not entertain such nonsense. With a burst of wind, he launched himself up off the ground. So wait, it is objectively better to be an Aether user than a Gene Tyrant, because you can basically just be a Gene Tyrant.
Ming is not ordinary Aether user.
With a burst of wind.
He's built different. His experiences are not universal.
He launched himself up off the ground and floated across from Wu Ming, the two of them circling each other in the sky. He'd have preferred not to invest too much of himself in a battle before he'd even found God, but Avaman had to admit this was not an opponent he could take lightly. Calmly he extended his hand, as if to grip something invisible, and spoke. Maelstrom job! The weapon appeared in a flash of aether like lightning. He didn't often bring out this aether armament. It was nearly 9 feet long in all. In total. Dwarfing its master. a thin spear bolstered into something more like a jousting lance by the restrained tornado that raged around it. With a single thrust of Maelstrom Job, 1,000 microcurrents would systematically tear apart whatever they came in contact with. Wu Ming whistled as his eyes scanned the lance. Strings of wind, right? Ooh, he said. You're bringing out that old thing? Your face is so repulsive, Avaman explained. I have to be sure to destroy every last bit of it. Despite the insult and the threat, Wu Ming just licked his lips. Oh, you know just what to say. His twin gazes blinked out of sequence. Avaman narrowed his eyes. Deviant. Tease. Wu Ming grinned.
I'm be like, I know what you are.
I know what you are. There's no way Wu Ming's not gay.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? With a roar of fury, not exertion, for the weapon was light as a feather, Avaman thrust male, a different kind of male.
Freudian slip.
Maelstrom. Maelstrom Job. Is it Job?
Job, yeah.
Maelstrom Job towards Wu Ming. The blast of air that came forth was tremendous, the size and speed of a raging train, and where it collided with the ground it looked as though a massive beast had dragged its claw along the earth. Wu Ming was not pulverized, though. As the dust cleared, Avaman saw that Ming was still in his original location. He'd woven his strings into a thick blanket that he'd held out in front of him as a shield. The sheet was frayed and battered, but it had still held. A half-assed ability made on a whim had blocked Maelstrom Job. Avaman's blood boiled. He's interesting. On a whim, 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 on a whim. Avaman had spent his entire existence struggling for glory and accolades, and all Wu Ming and Skipper had to do was want them? It didn't make sense. It wasn't fair. Wu Ming poked his head out from behind the curtain, still grinning despite the countless tiny scratches covering his face. Like it? He said. I call it whirlwind, great shit. Don't call it that! Avaman screamed. This time, Avaman slammed his weapon down onto Ming directly, and that was enough to spike him down into the ground.
We'll do a little trolling.
That is exactly the energy I think Avaman screamed with. He's so mad. He's rage quitting.
Yes.
Oh, my throat hurts so much. I'm trying to keep it up. Why are we doing this right before JoJo? Oh, God. Okay. Waves crashed as the water that had previously formed the sevenfold serpent surged across the ground. The pit the battle had gradually produced was well on its way to becoming a lake. The Supreme broke through the surface of the water with a gasp, waiting in place as he kept his head up. Blood dribbled out of his mouth as he choked out the words. Excel Surge, Seal of Fortune, Shangri-La. As the healing field began to form, there was a tremendous crash, and Esmeralda launched himself out of one of the falling geysers, heading straight for the Supreme. It made sense. He'd managed to inflict substantial damage on the Supreme by attacking the inside of his body. If the Supreme healed once more, he'd be right back at square one. So this was his last chance. His speed was incredible, enough to make a bullet blush. He'd reached the Supreme before he could finish healing, and at this distance, there was no time to switch to a different ability. He didn't have the freedom for a single stray syllable. Focused into a beam, this ability had been able to turn dust into a mass of flesh. He'd have to trust that principle would hold. As the Supreme swung to meet the incoming Esmeralda, he crushed the seal into a space a centimeter tall and a centimeter wide, and set the healing point to follow his index finger. Esmeralda had changed in the few seconds he'd been out of sight. He'd reallocated most of his feathers to attach to the stump of his leg and the ruins of his arm, effectively serving as rudimentary prosthetics. I have a question.
Yeah?
When he healed Skipper earlier, we know it brought back his tongue and shit, right?
Yeah.
So how come it didn't bring back Skipper's original arms?
Because there were prosthetics already there.
Okay. Effectively serving as rudimentary prosthetics. It was good thinking, which made this whole thing so much more aggravating. How could he not see that was what he was here for? As Esmeralda came into range, hands extended for a pair of heartbeat shotguns, the Supreme swung his finger at him like a sword. He should have used the bayonet when he had his hand in there. I'm just saying. Shangri-La trailing after it. They hit each other at the same time. As the pair of shotguns slammed into the Supreme's shoulder, he heard a dull crunch and felt his right arm go limp. Broken, no doubt, and needing to be healed. The Supreme's face twisted in pain, but he made no sound. Pain was an old friend, one he hadn't met with in a long time. He was glad of the reunion. The result of the Supreme's attack was much more interesting to look at. Where the seal had scraped past Esmeralda, a massive growth of flesh covered in incoherent eyes and tears and teeth as it took up most of the man's shoulder. It was like he tried to grow a second head, face stretched out to fit a shape not suited to it. Zachariah wobbled into the air as he fired a shotgun to retreat, his center of gravity thrown off by the new addition. Did he give him like a fucking teratoma?
Basically.
A cancerous tumor?
Yeah.
That wasn't a blunder the Supreme could permit. He kicked his feet in the water to launch himself towards Esmeralda, raising his finger for another attack, when Esmeralda popped his mouth open. There, rusting on his tongue, quill pointing directly at the Supreme, was a single emerald feather. Heartbeat bayonet! The screech of the attack was loud, but the Supreme was more surprised by the effect. This attack had been planned in advance, surely, otherwise Esmeralda wouldn't have known to aim for that finger. The Supreme's grin widened as he watched his own severed finger plop down into the water. Nice move. Still, it didn't stop the Supreme's... because his thing's already in that finger, right?
Yeah.
So now he's no ability?
Well, no, he just said... he was about to heal himself with it, so just cut off a finger.
Still, it didn't stop the Supreme's advance. He seized Esmeralda by his remaining arm before he could blast off again, his uproarious laughter sending ripples through the ocean below them. That's good! That's real damn good, Esmeralda! Now you're getting it! He roared, spittle flying from his lips. Don't tell me you're not like me when you're having so much fun, man! Esmeralda opened his mouth to lie to them both once more, but the Supreme just hurled him towards the mountain with a swing of his hand. As a reward for that wonderful attack, he'd hold off on healing for the moment, but that didn't mean he wanted to listen to bullshit. He'd read Esmeralda's file, shortly after he'd learnt the man had a file. Talden, the cradle, the true meat, everywhere this man went, the world exploded around him. Everywhere this man went, battle followed. These were not the actions of a man who disliked conflict. These were not the actions of a man focused on high and mighty ideals. These were the glories of a fighter, just like him! The Supreme grinned. He'd show him something cool. XL Surge! Earth Sculpt Uriel! As Esmeralda flew end over end towards the side of the mountain, the Supreme erected a wall around himself, draining out the area in his immediate vicinity. Then he got to work. The way he'd gotten out of the tongue dilemma had inspired him. What mattered to his ability wasn't that he spoke the words, but that he expressed them into the world. Using an instrument that produced the necessary sounds had been just fine. Maybe even writing them down would work, but he wouldn't test that right now. An expansion of his previous concept, a tube of stone he could put into his mouth, a tube that split into 10 branches, each terminating into another replica of his own head, the only difference between them being the minor variations of their innards. As Esmeralda slammed into the side of the mountain, sending rocks cascading down, the Supreme granted his structure air, and they spoke, incoherent as they talked over each other. Oh my god. Okay. XL Surge, Sevenfold Serpent Inferno! XL Surge, Helios' Stone! XL Surge, Cloud 10! XL Surge, Blink Winkle! XL Surge, Drowned World! XL Surge, Quantum King! XL Surge, Nascent Blade! XL Surge, Earth Sculpt Uriel! XL Surge, Black Saturn! XL Surge, Aetheral Links! Is that like Duel Links?
That's probably where I got the idea from.
The Supreme had originally believed that Aetheral Links, the ability of the original Commissioner Fane, wasn't a good match for his badge of honor. It pooled together the products of different Aether abilities into a single attack, allowing for powerful team attacks. Given that he fought alone and he could only use 2 abilities at a time anyway, the Supreme had thought it unsuited to him. These last few minutes had taught him otherwise. When he switched abilities, it took about a second for the effects of the ability to dissipate back into his aether. Normally, that wouldn't be long enough to take advantage of. But if he timed his secondary mouths carefully with Earth Sculpt Uriel, he could have abilities activate and deactivate so close in succession that they were practically simultaneous. 10 abilities brought themselves into the world and began to get pooled back in far less than 1 second. Fire and mist, water and crystal, earth and void. The Supreme held these opposing forces up above his head as a massive sphere, as big as a starship, the very air vibrating around his newfound apocalypse. Oh no. No! We're about to get home too. He had no doubt that if left alone, the thing he'd created would eventually just collapse. It wouldn't have time for that. Over many kilometers, the Supreme locked eyes with Zachariah Esmeralda. This will... Did you steal this from Record of Ragnarok?
I did remember the meme when I was writing it, but I was going to write it anyway.
I love you. This next hit will kill you if it hits, you know. He grinned and hurled the sphere. Esmeralda wasn't stupid and he wasn't slow. With his heartbeat shotgun, he launched himself up into the sky long before the sphere reached him. That was fine, though. The Supreme hadn't been aiming for him in the first place. The sphere smashed unburdened through the side of the mountain, passing through the stone like a knife through butter. As the Supreme watched, giggling in anticipation, that sphere dug deeper and deeper, until the mark it had left was nothing more than a pitch-black hole. It took only a second for the rumbling to start, and it only lasted a second. Boom! Like a soft drink shook for too long, the top of the mountain exploded into a shower of fire and magma. The Supreme laughed uproariously as he watched the calamity, the inferno spilling down onto the earth below. That volcano, long dormant, had been awoken by nothing more than his own power. He'd done that! The Supreme welcomed it all. He'd tasted water. Now for the flames!
Yeah.
That was exhausting. This next chapter will kill you.
Stop the war.
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Hang on.
He's leaving.
I'm getting my phone from the charger to get the question.
Here's a question.
I have a bunch of questions. I keep adding new ones, which doesn't help.
There is nothing to be sad. If the Supreme heard that, he'd understand.
Okay. What is the situation with drug legality in Aetheral Space?
Well, it would depend on what drug you're talking about.
Right. So, like, how are they viewed? Like, is it sort of like our era where there's, like, a war on drugs and it's, like, hard fines and labor and, like, crackdown busts, or is it more like, hey, you're not supposed to do that?
It depends really on the... If you're talking about supremacy, it depends on the area's premise you're in, because a lot of it is, like, pseudo-feudal in the sense that which territory you're in will determine, like, certain policies.
If you smoked meth, you had the strength to do so.
Some guys might think that, some people will be like, no. No meth.
You finished the meth before the cops could get you.
It's
What
like
is even the point of
truly
cops
splendid.
and lawyers in the supremacy? Is there any semblance of law?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How does it work then?
Well, the might above all part of it usually it applies in certain parts and not others for like practical purposes. So like if I took out and like shot 2 people, they're not gonna be like fight this dragon to see if you're innocent. It'd be like you're going to jail.
Because I was gonna say I had a funny idea where like you're trying to sue someone in court and you try to like win via might makes right. So all lawyers really are just like champions you hire.
The
to fight on
lawyer
your
comes
behalf.
into the court, he sees the other guy's been lifting, and he's like, "Oh man, I'm going to jail."
Yeah, you have a lot of money. You have to get like a scrawny, scrappy lawyer, and the other
I'm
guy's got
something of a
like Arnold
contender.
Schwarzenegger. And I just like we were memeing about like a judge who went to fucking like law school for 10 years and all anyone wants is trial by combat these days. 'Cause it's easier. The best law firms have the legal minds and the bronze, whatever your preference is. All right, but I guess that's it for now. My throat is. I'm gonna have to drink some water.
What will happen next time?
I don't know. This is the battle of all time. I don't know. You know. This is your story. Tell me.
I wrote this. The memories start coming back.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching.
That mysterious cloaked figure was me all along. Bye.